Gus McAllister stood behind the counter of the Oakwood diner, half-heartedly wiping down the polished chrome with a damp cloth as he watched his own reflection smirking back at him. "You look like you've seen it all," he muttered to himself, dropping the cloth and picking up a coffee pot. "Mr. Henderson, the usual?" Janie Thompson asked with a smile that could light up the darkest corners of the diner. The portly Mr. Henderson chuckled and nodded, his jowls wobbling in agreement. Same old," Gus mused, pouring coffee into a chipped mug for Mr. Henderson. He glanced over at Janie, who twirled her ponytail around her finger as she recited orders from memory. She was an Oakwood lifer, just like him, but she still managed to find joy in the smallest things. It was one of her most endearing qualities, but even she seemed to be wearing thin with the ceaseless repetition. "Say, Janie, don't you ever feel like we're stuck in some sort of loop? Like everything's repeating itself over and over again?" Gus asked, leaning against the counter with a knowing grin. "Sometimes," Janie replied with a sigh, her eyes drifting towards the window, as if searching for something new on the horizon. "But maybe that's just life in a small town for you." Just then, the diner door swung open with a bang, causing both Gus and Janie to jump. In stumbled Walter Brinkman, wild-eyed and disheveled, clutching a stack of papers covered in complex equations. Listen to me," Walter cried, waving the pages frantically. "I've discovered it, the origin of this infernal time loop we're trapped in." "Easy there, Walt," Gus said, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you've been wrestling with a tornado." "Never mind that," Walter snapped, shoving the papers into Gus's hands. "Look at this. I've spent decades analyzing the data, and I've finally found the source of our predicament. It all goes back to an experiment I conducted years ago. The consequences were unforeseen, to say the least." "An experiment?" Janie asked, her usual cheer replaced by genuine concern. "What kind of experiment?" "Quantum mechanics," Walter exclaimed, his voice cracking with urgency. "I was trying to unlock the secrets of time itself, but something went horribly wrong. Instead of advancing our understanding, I trapped us all in this never-ending cycle." "Time loop or not, Walt, don't you think you should take a break from all these calculations?" Gus suggested, giving the old man a gentle pat on the back. "Maybe grab a cup of coffee and a slice of pie?" "Can't you see? There's no time for pie," Walter shouted, his eyes wide with desperation. "We have to figure out how to break free from this cosmic prison, or we'll be doomed to repeat this day for all eternity." As Walter continued to rant about his findings, Gus and Janie exchanged a glance. While they couldn't deny the eerie familiarity of their daily routines, the idea of a time loop seemed almost too absurd to entertain. But as they looked around the diner, watching the same conversations play out for what felt like the umpteenth time, they couldn't help but wonder if Walter might be onto something. Gus watched a bead of sweat trickle down Walter's temple, his eyes wild behind smudged glasses. He suppressed a chuckle. The old scientist looked like he'd been slapped in the face with a wet fish. "All right, Walt, let's say we humor you for a moment," Gus said, scratching his graying beard. "What exactly do you want us to do about it?" "Help me!" Walter pleaded, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "We need to find a way out of this loop before it drives us all mad." "Mad?" Janie laughed, her voice bubbling with disbelief. "Walt, I think you've got that part covered already." "Janie, I'm serious," Walter insisted, his gaze darting between the two of them. "Please, just look around. Can't you see how everything is repeating itself?" Gus and Janie exchanged another skeptical glance, but as they observed the diner's patrons, they couldn't help but notice the unsettling repetition of their actions. Mr. Thompson spilled his coffee at the exact same moment he did every day, while Mrs. Johnson laughed at the same terrible joke her husband told her without fail. "Okay, so things are a little weird," Gus admitted, his voice tinged with doubt. "But that doesn't mean we're trapped in a time loop. People are creatures of habit, Walt. Maybe folks here are just stuck in their ways." "Stuck in their ways?" Walter scoffed. "This goes far beyond that. Don't tell me you haven't noticed your own patterns repeating, day after day." Gus shifted uncomfortably, thinking of the countless mornings he'd spent flipping pancakes and cracking eggs, feeling an inexplicable sense of déjà vu. Beside him, Janie frowned, her fingers playing with the edge of her apron. "Maybe we should listen to him, Gus," she said hesitantly. What if he's right? What if we really are stuck in a loop? Janie. Gus sighed, knowing that his own doubts were beginning to gnaw at him. All right, Walt. Let's say we're on board with this time loop business. What do you need us to do? First, we need to gather information, Walter explained, a hint of relief creeping into his voice. I have some theories, but I need more data. We need to observe the loop and see if there are any inconsistencies or clues that could lead us to a way out. Gus and Janie nodded, their growing dissatisfaction with the monotony of their daily routines fueling their willingness to join Walter in his bizarre quest. Okay, Walt, Gus agreed, extending a hand to the frantic scientist. We're in. Time loop or not, it's about time we shook things up around here. Thank you, Walter breathed, clasping Gus's hand with surprising strength. Together, we'll break free from this endless cycle and reclaim our lives. As they stood together in the diner, watching the familiar faces of Oakwood repeat their well-worn paths, Gus, Janie, and Walter found an unexpected sense of camaraderie in their shared mission. United by their desperation for change, they prepared to embark on the strangest journey of their lives, armed with nothing but hope and determination. Here's to breaking the loop, Janie whispered, raising an invisible toast, and to finding something better on the other side. A dimly lit room smelled of mothballs and old books, perfect for clandestine meetings and hatching madcap schemes. Gus eyed the dusty chandelier swaying above them, wondering if it would choose that exact moment to break free from its chains and crash down on them all. Janie sat with her legs crossed, nervously tapping her foot on the worn carpet, while Walter paced back and forth, muttering equations under his breath. Are you sure he's coming? Janie whispered, her voice barely audible in the musty air. Relax, Gus replied, smirking at the absurdity of their situation. I'm pretty sure Mayor Whitaker has never been late to anything in his life. As if summoned by their conversation, the door creaked open to reveal a figure shrouded in shadow. The room seemed to shrink, as if even the walls were intimidated by the presence of Oakwood's most revered authority figure. Mayor Samuel Whitaker stepped into the room, his tailored suit seemingly unaffected by the layer of dust that coated everything else. His sharp blue eyes darted between Gus, Janie, and Walter, assessing them with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Let's get this over with, he said, his voice firm yet tinged with unease. What do you want? Mayor Whitaker, Walter began, his wild eyes betraying his excitement. We've discovered something unnatural happening in Oakwood. A time loop, to be precise. Time loop? Whitaker scoffed, crossing his arms. You dragged me here for some nonsense about science fiction? Sir, it's true, Janie interjected. Gus and I have noticed it too. People repeating the same things, the same conversations, day after day. Whitaker's gaze flickered between the three of them, considering the possibility that they had all lost their minds. Gus couldn't blame him for his skepticism. It was the type of story you'd expect to find in some pulpy paperback, not in real life. Fine, the mayor sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Let's say I believe you. What do you want me to do about it? Help us break the loop, Walter answered simply. With your authority and resources, we might stand a chance. Very well, Whitaker agreed, his voice betraying a hint of resignation. I'll support your efforts, but keep this quiet. If word gets out, there will be panic. Thank you, sir, Walter said, relief washing over his face. Speaking of support, Janie added, her eyes brightening with excitement. We've found someone who might be able to help us unravel this mystery. The door opened again, and a young woman stepped into the room. Taran Guyan looked more like a studious teenager than a prodigy scientist, with oversized glasses framing her round face and ink-stained fingers clutching a stack of papers. She smiled nervously at the assembled group, her eyes flickering between Walter and Whitaker. Hi, I'm Tara, she said, her voice wavering slightly under the weight of their stares. I've been studying the time loop ever since I first noticed it, and I think I have some theories on how to break it. Another one? Mayor Whitaker muttered, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off an impending headache. All right, let's hear what you've got. As Tara began to explain her hypotheses, Gus glanced around the room at the unlikely group of allies they had assembled. They were a motley crew, bound together by a shared determination to overcome the impossible and restore order to their town. And despite the absurdity of their situation, Gus couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of excitement at the prospect of breaking free from the monotony that had plagued them for so long. Here's to breaking the loop, he thought, imagining his life beyond the endless cycle of repetition. And to whatever madness awaits us on the other side. Gus watched, entranced, as Walter scribbled intricate equations on the chalkboard, his unkempt white hair flying wildly in every direction. Tara stood beside him, her round face animated with excitement as she chimed in with additional theories and explanations. Gus had never felt so out of his depth, but there was something strangely exhilarating about it. "All right," Walter began, pausing to wipe chalk dust from his glasses. "The foundation of this time loop lies in quantum mechanics, specifically, the idea of superposition." "Super what now?" Gus muttered, scratching his graying beard in confusion. "Superposition," Tara clarified, her eyes alight with curiosity. "It's the idea that particles can exist in multiple states at once, like Schrödinger's cat being both alive and dead until you observe it." "Ah, yes, the famous undead kitty," Gus replied dryly, earning a giggle from Janie. "Exactly," Walter exclaimed, clearly not picking up on Gus's sarcasm. "Now, imagine that same principle applied to an entire town, Oakwood. We're both here and not here, trapped between two possible realities." "Sounds cozy," Gus mused, his thoughts drifting back to the endless days of serving coffee and scrambled eggs at the diner. "Unfortunately, it's far from cozy," Tara said, her tone sobering. "We need to reset the loop, collapse the superposition, and restore Oakwood to its rightful place in the space-time continuum." "Simple enough," Janie interjected with a grin. "Just need to find the right button to push, right?" "Something like that," Walter conceded, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Now, let's get down to the finer details of quantum mechanics." As the unconventional lesson continued, Gus couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. He glanced around the dimly lit room, his eyes settling on a shadowy figure lurking just outside the window. Officer Ramirez stood with her arms crossed, her narrowed gaze focused on their impromptu classroom. Walter," Gus whispered, interrupting the older man's enthusiastic lecture. "We might have a problem." "Problem?" Walter asked, following Gus's line of sight to the window. "Oh dear." "Is that Officer Ramirez?" Janie whispered, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a growing unease. "What do we do? If she finds out about our plan, it's all over." "Leave it to me," Tara said suddenly, her expression determined. "I'll go out there and distract her. Just keep going with the lesson, okay?" "Are you sure, Tara?" Walter asked, concern etched on his wrinkled face. "Positive," she replied, adjusting her oversized glasses. "Time loops and quantum mechanics are my forte, but I can handle a little improvisation." As Tara slipped out the door, Gus couldn't help but wonder if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. The weight of Oakwood's fate rested on their mismatched shoulders, and it was beginning to feel heavier than any plate of bacon he'd ever served. "All right, let's get back to it," Walter said, clapping his chalk-covered hands together. "The faster we learn this, the faster we can break free from this loop." Snip. "Here's to hoping we don't end up in an even bigger mess," Gus thought, his internal wit strangely comforting amidst the chaos. But then again, what was life without a little dark comedy? Gus stood in front of Oakwood University's imposing gates, his heart hammering against his ribs with the force of a jackhammer. He glanced nervously at his companions, their eyes reflecting the same mix of excitement and dread. The lab was just a stone's throw away, yet it felt like they were about to embark on a perilous journey across treacherous mountains. "All right," Walter said, adjusting his lopsided bow tie as he eyed the security camera perched above the gate. "We need to get inside without anyone knowing we're here, especially Officer Ramirez. Janie, you're the most familiar with the campus layout. What's our best route?" Janie chewed her lip thoughtfully, tracing an invisible map in the air. "There's a maintenance entrance around the back. It's usually locked, but I think I can jimmy it open." "Lead the way," Walter instructed, and the group followed Janie through a hidden path that snaked around the university's immaculate gardens. As they approached the maintenance door, Gus couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of unease. They were breaking into a highly secured facility, risking everything for a chance to reset the loop. But if they succeeded, would life really be any better? Would the dull monotony of the diner be any less suffocating? "Got it," Janie whispered triumphantly, the door creaking open to reveal a dimly lit corridor. They slipped inside, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Where do we go from here?" Tara asked, her voice barely audible. "2 flights up, then to the left," Janie replied, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. "Let's move," Walter urged, and they crept along the shadowy hallway, hugging the walls as if trying to merge with the darkness itself. "Wait," Gus said suddenly, grabbing Walter's arm. "Before we go any further, there's something I need to say." "What is it?" Walter asked, his eyes narrowing with concern. "Breaking this loop. It's not just about escaping the same old routine, is it?" Gus questioned, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's about taking control of our lives, making our own choices instead of being stuck in a never-ending cycle." Walter smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on Gus's shoulder. "That's right, my boy. We're fighting for our freedom, our right to live the lives we choose." "Then let's get some allies on board," Janie declared, determination shining in her eyes. "Mayor Whitaker may be a stickler for rules, but I bet he'd prefer a world where he can make new decisions. And Officer Ramirez, she's tough, but she cares about this town just as much as we do." "Agreed," Tara chimed in, her youthful enthusiasm infectious. "We'll need all the help we can get if we're going to pull this off." "All right then," Walter said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared resolve. "Let's find that mechanism and break this damn loop once and for all." As they continued down the dimly lit corridor, Gus couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer simply fighting against the monotony of their daily routines. They were fighting for their futures, for the chance to forge their own paths and make meaningful choices. And with the support of their unlikely allies, they just might stand a chance. Gus stared at the monstrous machine before him, its tangled web of cables and blinking lights seeming to mock their efforts to decipher it. Walter scratched his head as he pored over the blueprints they'd found hidden in a dusty corner of the university lab. "All right, folks," Walter said, one eyebrow raised. "The good news is that we've discovered the heart of the time loop. The bad news is that it looks like it was designed by a sadist with a penchant for puzzles." "Charming," Janie muttered, rolling her eyes. "So, what's our next move?" "First, we need to figure out how this thing works," Tara chimed in, her fingers tracing the maze of wires as she attempted to make sense of the mechanism. "Once we understand the basics, maybe we can start thinking about how to reset it." As the team delved deeper into the labyrinthine workings of the machine, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A shiver ran down Gus's spine as he glanced around the darkened lab, his imagination conjuring unsettling shadows among the flickering fluorescence. "Guys," Mayor Whitaker whispered, his voice quivering with unease. Are we alone in here?" Before anyone could respond, the doors to the lab swung open with a theatrical flourish, revealing Reverend Jones and his motley crew of hedonistic followers. Clad in tattered clerical robes, Rev's wild eyes gleamed with unsettling intensity as he greeted the group. "Ah, fellow travelers on this infinite carousel of existence," he exclaimed, arms wide open in a twisted welcome. "I must say, I'm rather disappointed you've chosen to meddle with our little paradise." "Paradise?" Gus snorted, unable to contain his disgust. "You call living the same day over and over again a paradise?" "Indeed," Reverend Jones replied, his fervent passion bordering on mania. "This time loop is a gift, my friends, an eternal respite from the dreary monotony of linear existence. What greater joy could there be than to indulge in one's desires without consequence?" "Let me guess," Janie interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You and your merry band of creeps just love having access to an infinite playground where you can behave like depraved lunatics without facing any repercussions." "Depraved lunatics?" Rev feigned offense, placing a hand over his heart. "We merely seek to enjoy the freedom this time loop provides. But alas, we cannot allow you to endanger our eternal haven." Gus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. It was bad enough being trapped in this endless cycle, but to be confronted with someone who actually wanted to preserve it, that was a whole new level of infuriating. "Listen here, Rev," he said, his voice shaking with barely restrained rage. "We're not going to let your twisted idea of paradise ruin our lives. We're going to break this loop and get back our freedom, whether you like it or not." Such admirable resolve, Reverend Jones mused, his tone deceptively calm. "However, I must warn you that my followers and I will do everything in our power to protect our divine sanctuary. May the best faction win." And with that ominous declaration, Reverend Jones and his acolytes disappeared into the shadows, leaving Gus and the others to contemplate the escalating stakes of their mission. Walter picked at the fraying fabric of his tattered lab coat, the weight of Reverend Jones's words sinking into him like a rusty knife. It seemed they had just stepped out of one hellish frying pan and directly into the fire, with the flames licking hungrily at their feet. "Look," Janie said in a hushed voice, her ponytail bobbing with determination. "I know this is a setback, but we can't let them stop us. We need to find more people who are aware of the loop and want to break it." Gus sighed, absent-mindedly running a hand through his graying hair. "Yeah, you're right. But how do we do that? Most people in town don't have a clue about what's going on, or they're part of that sadistic cult." "Perhaps," Tara mused, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose, "we could devise an ingenious way to identify those who share our cause. Some subtle sign that only those who are aware of the time loop would recognize." "Like a secret handshake?" Walter suggested, wiggling his fingers in a comically sinister fashion. The others exchanged bemused glances, trying not to smirk. "Or something less juvenile," Janie replied, rolling her eyes playfully. "But the idea is solid, a signal that shows we're in the know, without raising suspicion from the rest of Oakwood." "Then let's do it," Gus declared, his mischievous eyes sparkling anew. "We'll gather allies, find a way to reset the loop, and shove it down Reverend Jones's twisted throat." "Very eloquent, Gus," Walter said, his expression caught somewhere between amusement and exasperation. "But first, we should make sure we understand every detail of this hidden mechanism. Knowledge is power, after all." "Right," Janie agreed. "And if we're going to go up against Reverend Jones and his freaky followers, we'll need all the power we can get." Tara nodded enthusiastically, her scientific curiosity already itching to unravel the secrets of the mysterious mechanism. "Together, we can crack this puzzle and reclaim our lives from this temporal prison." "Damn right we can," Gus said, his resolve hardening like day-old diner coffee. "Now let's get to work." As they gathered around the hidden mechanism, each member of the ragtag group felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through their veins. The stakes were higher than ever, but so too was their determination to shatter the time loop that held Oakwood captive. And as they dove headfirst into the next phase of their journey, the air buzzed with electric anticipation, leaving the reader eager to see how they would overcome the challenges ahead.